It fell apart under its own weight. There's gotta be a metaphor in there somewhere, right? Yes, this is my copy of Atlas Shrugged. Yes, I bought it used and then had to duct tape it when it fell apart completely. And yes, I know everybody hates this book. This video is intended to make this book make sense by recontextualizing it in a couple of different ways, which should also help make it more fun or at least less agonizing to read for those of you who have to. And also, I will tell you enough about Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism that you can skip John Galt's 60-plus page radio speech that destroys the narrative pacing of the entire section of the book. I read the whole speech once, and I strongly encourage you to never do that. It's just John Galt telling us what the rest of the book is showing us. So even if you're really into the philosophy, there's still no reason to read this stinker of a section. But I am not just going to be hating here. Maybe I'm rare in the brain, but I like this book enough that I've read it multiple times and that I have enough thoughts and opinions about it that I wanted to make this video. And this book absolutely has real strengths. They just aren't what the author thought they were. Except for maybe the sex scenes, which are all Ayn Rand's completely undisguised fetish, but that's a completely different video. Please let me know in the comments if you'd like me to make a video about Ayn Rand and sex. Here's the thing. Ayn Rand is a decent writer who knows how to set a scene, evoke a mood, and convey an emotion. The problem is her ideals, not her prose. Most of the time, again, there's that awful speech. Anyway, her ideals have inspired and continue to inspire some super terrible stuff, but in my opinion, even she would disapprove of a whole lot of it. I'm Rachel. I'm a professional writer and an amateur weirdo. Everyone tells me I'm weird. Everything in this video is just my perspective, so please be chill if you choose to comment. Welcome to Rachel Reads Science Fiction. Now let's get into the book. Read as general fiction, Atlas Shrugged makes no sense at all. It makes perfect sense if you read it as science fiction. It's about another world where politics and physics are different, where the engine John Galt makes actually works, and there's so little genius and creativity in the world, it can all be safely stashed in one mountain valley by one guy within 12 years. So it fits the wide definition of sci-fi right off the bat. Different world, different technology, but Rand thought she was writing general fiction about our world. She says in a note from 1957 that her personal life is the postscript to her novels, and it consists of the sentence, "and I mean it," and the edition of the book of Atlas Shrugged that I have includes several postcards that tell you to write into an Objectivism club. If you take her ideas seriously, write into this club and we will send you a bunch more of her works for free. These postcards in the club, therefore, show she meant people to take this book and the ideas in it seriously and use them to guide the world. But that's a horrible idea. The truth is, her works are her reaction to her very hungry, very scared childhood during the Russian Communist Revolution and the early years of the USSR, which were incredibly unstable and traumatic for everyone who lived through them. How do I know this? Because she wrote another book called We the Living that provides invaluable context on everything she wrote, and which I will get to later. Also, none of the business or capitalism stuff is accurate to our worlds at all either, which I will also get to later. What is objectivism and why is it complete fantasy? Objectivism is Ayn Rand's philosophy, and she called it objectivism as in this is the objective truth, which shows you the ego she had on her. Philosophy itself is basically what John Galt lays out in his radio speech that you should not read, namely, you should be living your life for yourself, and nobody has the right to tell you otherwise or to force you to live for others. Guilt is the tool people use to manipulate the competent into providing for them, and the competent have merely to cast off the idea of guilt to be free. Atlas, the titan who holds up the world, has merely to shrug off his burden of the earth to be free. He is letting himself be kept a prisoner, even though he is a titan. Happiness, she says, is using your mind to its fullest power to earn what money you can. Money is what allows us to easily trade labor for agreed upon value. The current political systems demand that you work for others and give them things they haven't earned, so they're bad. People who demand you love them because they exist is also bad. Anything earned is good because it's yours, and anything unearned is bad because it's not. And now you can skip that 60+ pages. Just pick right back up at the last few paragraphs of the speech, which should be easy to find because they're at the very end of the chapter. John Galt finishes his radio speech by saying that his people are those that take the following oath, which is the crux of the entire philosophy. I swear, by my life and my love of it, that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine. I swear, by my life and my love of it, that I will never live for the sake of another man, nor ask another man to live for mine. And this is a complete fantasy, because it is the opposite of what a society is. A society is people working together to help each other. People working together to create a community that provides resources that help us all, like hospitals. Not ever doing anything for anyone else is how society collapses. This philosophy has also broadly led to a lot of people rejecting welfare-type programs that help people. But in my opinion, that's wrong. I think Ayn Rand is saying to take your pleasure, basically. And if you selfishly enjoy helping others, then you can do that. And you can do that as a society, if you please, and vote it so, as long as those who work are also able to keep the fruits and profits of their labors, which means you can absolutely take from that a full-on anti-tax message, but I think that's wrong too. Again, in my opinion, paying taxes that gets things like roads your company can use and schools for your employees' kids and hospitals, etc., those are all things that you as an employer would have to provide in order to keep your employees and their families happy if you want to attract the best work. If the government isn't providing it, that's a good bargain. It's a lot cheaper for the government to be making all of the roads than for each local employer to be making the roads around them. It's a good bargain for business owners. And Rand was a proponent of value for value. And in a non-broken system, that's what taxes are. That's what taxes should be. Atlas Shrugged is an apocalyptic fantasy of what Ayn Rand thought could happen in the US if the worldwide communist revolution that the communists in the USSR thought would happen was actually happening. A doom scenario about what happens when everyone is forced to help everyone else until nobody has anything. But governments don't give away everything to other countries in a way that would hurt their own people. That's not actually how foreign aid or welfare or taxes work. It's a complete fantasy. It's not how people work. In law school, I learned about how the US government and corporations actually work, so I know how absurdly wrong the governmental directives in this book are. There are 2 rules in this book that come down from the federal government. The Equalization of Opportunity Bill, which keeps people from owning more than one business, and Directive 10-289, which freezes everything in the business world. No hiring, firing, changing of jobs, changing of wages, etc. Business enslavement, basically. And we don't have to worry about the anti-dog-eat-dog rule here because that's created by a professional organization and not a government or governmental agency. Let me smash open the Equalization of Opportunity and Directive 10-289 for you. So first, if you can't own more than one company, like the Equalization of Opportunity Bill says that you can't, what you do in our world, in the real world, is that you combine your companies all into one and make some of them subdivisions. And you then just continue to own all of them and it's all one corporation. So Hank didn't have to give up anything. Nobody did. Unless it works completely differently in their world, which again means sci-fi. Okay, next, she's removed the concepts of liability and insurance from this book entirely, things which, in our world, have existed for centuries. So right there, this could never be a world, another point for sci-fi. And the business enslavement stuff is just flat out unconstitutional, which means if there was a working court, it would have been immediately legally paused with an injunction and then blasted out of the books when the Supreme Court or any higher court got to it. But even if the courts are all completely corrupt, which I think is the implication in this book, it's also just not the kind of thing that can ever actually be enforced. Life will go on as usual. There will just be massive amounts of fraud. That's what happens in the book. And then also, Ayn ignores the entire concept of a social safety net in this book in favor of having the government of the US solely give foreign aid to the communist people states elsewhere in the world and then devolve into backroom deals and cronyism with competence nowhere to be seen, entirely run by thugs. In the book, those thugs who demand value at the point of a gun are called looters, and people who need help and ask for it without offering any value in return are called moochers. And yeah, Ayn, I agree that cronyism is bad. Government shouldn't be back deals like James Taggart does in the creepy rooftop bar that's designed to look like a basement. It should be out in the open. public, responsible, and competent. But capitalism, as we have all seen, does not prevent a government from becoming run by incompetent thugs intent on enriching themselves at the expense of the country's people. The USSR of her childhood is not the only type of government run by manipulative brutes. This book has become a conservative manifesto, but in my opinion, Ayn Rand would have complete contempt for everything happening today and for almost all the people who glorify her. She would not approve of, for example, subsidies for oil companies, nepotism of the incompetent, or the concept of influencers. She wants the pure capitalism of, I do the job, then I get paid. Like Malcolm Reynolds in episode 1 of Firefly. Atlas Shrugged itself glorifies high wages, paying higher for the best. It's specifically said in the book that Hank Rearden has all the best workers because he pays the highest wages in the industry. More rewards to the competent, the responsible, the genius. And I don't disagree with that, I just don't think the incompetent deserve to starve. Reading this book made me understand what the real difference between US Republican and Democratic philosophies was before all of this madness. Basically, everyone in the US wants things to be fair. They just disagree on what fair means. To Republicans, it's fair for me to keep what I've earned. And for Democrats, it's fair for us to take care of everyone. Personally, I think the Republican thing sounds nice, but it's a complete pipe dream until we fulfill the Democratic vision first. When Dagny Taggart, the protagonist of Atlas Shrugged, finally finishes her cross-country fetch quest, having flown and driven all over the US of A to track down various property and factory owners and then the factory itself, she's left with the larger mystery of the partially completed, totally sci-fi motor that pulls energy directly from the atmosphere, which is completely impossible. And solving that mystery eventually leads her to Galt himself, right as his plane is taking off from the airport she's landing at. She's an amateur pilot, of course, so she chases him in her plane. She takes right off again, and she chases him. She ends up crash landing into his private reserve, which he calls Mulligan's Valley and everyone else calls Galt's Gulch. Here, Atlas Shrugged is that Inception thing where there's a world within a world, and that inner world is Galt's Gulch. As in Inception's deeper dreams, the inner world is meant to be most symbolic of the story's heart, of its thesis. This is John Galt's paradise that he has built by convincing competent people, mostly CEOs, to go on strike and abandon the world and come with him. John shows Dagny this valley and its people to try to get her to join his strike, to leave the world to the destruction he's sure it will face without them. Dagny refuses, so John calls her a scab, only lets her stay for summer vacation, not even kidding, and then kicks her out because she wants to try again to fix the world. Because she hates and has always hated the view that man was ever to be drawn by some vision of the unattainable shining ahead, doomed ever to aspire, but not to achieve. But John wants her to accept his ideas before he'll let her stay for good. Or before he'll be with her. And they have an immediate sexual attraction, so this actually is a lever against her. Tragically, John Galt does eventually convince Dagny that the world is beyond saving until after it collapses. The only person who keeps trying to the very end is Dagny's assistant, Eddie Willers, who ends up emotionally wrecked, sobbing in front of a broken train. Literally, he collapsed across the rail and lay sobbing at the foot of the engine while thinking that he must now start this train because it represents the best within himself, which is represented by Dagny and her will, which was always to keep the trains running. He doesn't know that she's abandoned him now, watching the lights of New York City go out from an airplane headed to Galt's Gulch, as she and the other strikers leave modern society to collapse. Galt's Gulch is full of all the CEOs that Galt has pulled from the world, but Ayn does also count artists and writers among the people who belong there. She's not a total hypocrite, but she paints these artists as the few who still use beauty and truth to express their ideas. The young writer we meet, says John, wouldn't be published outside because she believes that when one deals with words, one deals with the mind. Which is very, very weird to us in the here and now. People use art to express their truth all the time. That's what art is, practically by definition. But I suppose this could seem rare to someone who grew up in a time and a place where things like that were heavily censored, where the only writers who got to keep publishing were those who wrote what the state wanted them to, the USSR. This tells me that Ayn Rand never really understood capitalism or individualism. Even after she moved to the US in her 20s, Ayn Rand never really understood capitalism or individualism, other than as a reaction to the botched collectivism of her youth. She never stopped reacting to the trauma of her past, never understood how individuals are still part of a community. The characters in Atlas Shrugged who are successful form a few personal bonds, but never those bonds with the wider community. Atlas Shrugged contains Ayn Rand's positive example of what could be, her ideal. The negative example is shown in her first novel, We the Living, which is a fictionalized autobiography of her thoughts and feelings about her youth in Soviet Russia. She was 12 when the Russian Revolution happened and lived through all of those turbulent early years. In We the Living, you can see society rapidly twisting in upon itself in a painful spiral of contradictions and impossibilities and propaganda. Both feature a passionate heroine with great legs and an indomitable personality, struggling to live and love the way she wants to and build what she wants to in the face of that rapidly decaying society. Her horror vision of her own personal apocalypse, like for the whole world to become like the one of her childhood and thus inescapable. How am I so sure that We the Living is about her own childhood? She says in its introduction that We the Living is as near to an autobiography as I will ever write. The plot is made up, but the setting is real and Kira's thoughts are Ayn's. We the Living features Kira Argonova, a 19-year-old engineering student in Soviet Russia. Her family was rich before the revolution, bourgeoisie, and now they have nothing, and life is still very dangerous for them because they used to be bourgeoisie. She falls in love with the son of a general from the old regime, and moves in with him while also kind of dating Andrei, a Communist Party member. Kira and Leo try to make a life for themselves against the background of their whole city getting poorer and hungrier. Leo gets sick and will die without treatment. The only way Kira can make that happen is to become Andrei's mistress. To save the man she loves, that's what she becomes. Leo comes home healthy but depressed because of everything around them and because he knows what she did to save him. He puts his life on the line for a corrupt business arrangement because he feels he has no future. Eventually, shit hits the fan and everyone ends up jaded and most of them end up dead. The whole novel, the people around Kira get more and more sunk into performing their ideologies out loud to avoid getting into trouble because they're constantly being watched by the secret police. You see the same things happening to people in Atlas Shrugged as the directives get worse. The same oppressive moods and suspicions overtaking society around our heroines. The book presents Kira as one of the only people in the place who understands that one must live for oneself because nobody else will. Just like the inhabitants of Galt's Gulch, only there's no John Galt to take Kira away. Both women feel there's something inviolable and inevitable about themselves and their accomplishments and their futures. They hold on to that space and that feeling no matter the circumstances. This is so strong in both books. I cannot help but feel like this is how Ayn felt and how she saw the world. We the Living was written a good 20 years before Atlas Shrugged, but you can see the same ideologies pulsing through them both. And both books have the same gorgeous descriptions in them too, but the reason Atlas Shrugged is the much better book is character development. Kira knows all these correct answers instinctually from the beginning, from the first few pages, and never wavers in her belief of them. Kira knows from the start the work she had chosen and which she expected of life. The other thing which she expected she did not know, for it had no name, but it had been promised to her, promised in a memory of her childhood. She worshipped joy. The story has barely begun when she tells Andrei that his Communist Party is the fundamental flaw that will turn your paradise into the most unspeakable hell. Your claim that man must live for the state. Don't you know that there are things in the best of us which no outside hand should dare to touch? Things sacred because and only because one can say, "This is mine." In Atlas Shrugged, when Dagny finds these answers, she feels they answer the inviolable feeling inside of her that she's never been able to name. That's how she knows they're correct. It's how Kira's been feeling all her life. And those inviolable feelings, that's where the book's title comes from, We the Living. And it refers to the ones who are truly alive, awake to life and its possibilities and the fact that we are people, living and feeling in a harsh world that fights back against that. In a word, woke. Ayn Rand was woke, and her whole aim in writing was to help others wake up in the same way. It's just that many of her ideas for how society should work are fundamentally flawed. As Ayn Rand says herself in the introduction to We the Living, in essence, it comes down to a single question. Do you consider it moral to treat men as sacrificial animals and to rule them by physical force? And she clearly comes down on the side of it not being moral to use physical force. That's a strongly woke sentiment. In fact, the main conflict of Atlas Shrugged itself is a reaction to the communism of the USSR that Ayn Rand experienced in her youth and that's displayed in We the Living, expressed succinctly in the philosophy of the factory that John Galt originally walks out of when he swears his vendetta against the world. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need, and a few corrupt people decide who needs what. Thus, Ayn, fleeing from that system, feels that everyone's work should be counted and they should be rewarded for the amount of work they do. And that makes sense to me, but here's where it falls apart. She tells people not to support moochers, but the second people don't support their own family members who can't work, those people and then society itself are just SOL, since she certainly does not advocate for a social safety net. Not living for anyone else, like Galt's oath says, means you have no obligation to even feed your children, and that if you don't want to, you shouldn't. She certainly does imply you should, but transactionally. It is against our rules to provide the unearned sustenance of another human being, John tells Dagny on one of her first days in Galt's Gulch. Some of us have wives and children, but there is a mutual trade involved in that, and a mutual payment, he glanced at her, of a kind I'm not entitled to collect. And they're both super in lust already, so his glance is not a light one, and this whole thing heavily implies that the sex you get from your wife is payment for you taking care of the material needs of her and the kids. She has a mother in Galt's Gulch say that motherhood is an important trade, and that she understands that raising happy, independent children can be its own reward, but doesn't extend that understanding to anything or anyone outside the immediate family. For instance, there is, at a later point in Atlas Shrugged, a social worker that shows up very briefly, and Ayn Rand has great contempt for social workers. She calls her a sob sister, and I think is sort of implying that she's like feeding off the misery of the people she says she's helping, or something like that. There's not much detail here, but Ayn Rand clearly has a lot of contempt for social workers. Maybe she had a bad experience with one in her youth. Who knows? I don't. But here's another little sticky point. The mother in Galt's Gulch says that she came there in large part because she would not surrender her children to the educational systems devised to stunt a child's brain, to convince him that reason is impotent. And high-key, I think this one passage probably doomed a lot of kids to homeschooling, who would have benefited much more from a public education. At least Ayn Rand's philosophies, unlike some other sci-fi philosophies, allow for love and relationships. Heck, that's most of the meat of We the Living, but there must always be that transactionalism. Rand has despicable characters like Lillian Riordan and James Taggart demand to be loved for existing and not for what they do or how they do it, like Dagny Taggart and Hank Riordan. But I ask you, how can yourself and what you do and who you are and how you think, how can any of that really be separated meaningfully, especially when it comes to love? But I would also like to take a moment to think of poor Cheryl, one of the only actually good people in the book. Cheryl, Dagny's sister-in-law, genuinely has a good heart, and she pays the ultimate price for it. Her compassion, kindness, and willingness to see good in others are what lead to her undoing. She puts her trust in James Taggart, a bad man, because she sees good in him that isn't there, and at first he likes that, but then he comes to resent it, and he betrays her. Hank Riordan has learned by then that somebody else's action cannot impact his character, but Cheryl is not, and she cares about her marriage. Cheryl very literally ends up taking a long walk off a short pier. Dagny, on the other hand, resents that convention requires she care about others, unaware that there are many people who find fulfillment in caring for or helping others in the same way that she finds fulfillment in business and hard work. She gets a happy ending. She gets several men who are good in general and good for her but not perfect, and then she gets her perfect true love happy ending. And Cheryl, who saw the good in people, she does not. The problem with trying to quantify human behavior with any kind of logic is that humans are not logical. We act on emotions and impulses all the time. Atlas Shrugged suggests that everyone should simply do the correct thing at all times, then everything would be great. But that's not how people work. We look at things intellectually and we think, why should that hurt me? But then they happen and they're devastating, and we act in wild ways we never thought we would, driven by feelings so deep We're shocked by them almost as much as the bad thing. Atlas Shrugged makes the assertion that exceptionalism could have cured their world if only the looters and moochers had listened to the exceptional, but they didn't, so competence is now on strike and the world is getting worse and worse, as if there were only a few hundred competent people in a world of billions, as if the most competent didn't need many, many more competent people around them to contribute to the success of the enterprise. Ayn Rand uses this book to glorify her personal brand of selfishness, which she calls freedom, but if it's only freedom to be one way, it's not really freedom, is it? Rand thought the good stuff in this book were ideals and her philosophy, but in my opinion, actual strengths of Atlas Shrugged include interesting flawed characters, evocative descriptions, and how progressive the book is about sex. Dagny Taggart is a woman who gets to love and be with multiple men over the course of the book, and she's not punished for it, which women often are in literature. Instead, each relationship helps her to grow more fully into herself. So the book is not void of literary merit, but it has inspired a lot of cruel and unrealistic policies. The people making those policies, like Ayn Rand herself, didn't realize that this book is science fiction and cannot and should not be applied one-to-one to our Earth. If you want a similar, but much more down-to-earth and shorter book, one where people proclaiming their ideals out loud a lot doesn't feel so weird or jarring because it fits the setting, read We the Living instead. If you have to read Atlas Shrugged for school, well, do what you gotta do. I hope you enjoyed this video and that I've earned your subscription. Please like and subscribe and come back for more. Have a delicious day. Oh, and here's the new tongue twister. Dagny Taggart's cross-country fetch quest. 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 Dagny Taggart's cross-country fetch quest.